Hey summoners, make sure that you're subscribed to the Mobalytics YouTube channel and hit that bell button, that way you're always up to date and part of our notification squad. Hello summoners and welcome back to Mobalytics, where today we have the patch 8.24 tier list video. Alright, listen good and listen hard. You listening? You ready? Guess what? We just released Mobalytics 2.0. This is something that you guys have got to see and check out for yourself. This will be the best tool by far in Season 9 for you guys to use. We have so many new and unique tools for you guys to check out. We've totally redone the GPI. There's a brand new dashboard, summoner search, progress, analysis. We've actually just released a developer update video if you're interested in some of the more specifics and why we made the changes that we did, but I will leave a link in the description down below and in the comments for you guys to check out the new Mobalytics 2.0 today. As far as the tier list, right before we start, just as an update about Nico, if you guys didn't know or if you're new here, we do not actually analyze or put a champion on the tier list when they are in their first patch cycle. So if a champion gets reworked or a new champion is released, that is why you will not see them on that first tier list. But if Nico is OP or really good, you will see her on next time's tier list. Also, if the video sounds weird, I apologize, my deepest apologies. I'm trying to get over a little bit of an illness, just a sickness, so if it sounds slightly weird, that's why. I hope you can forgive me. Anyway, let's get into patch 8.24. Starting off on the top side of the map, we have my first pick of the week, this time with Jax, which we'll get into in a second. Couple new things moving around. We predict that tanks will be better and start to get better in more play. This is because if you think about it, right now people are playing a lot of mage comps and upfront loaded bursts, which means that if you start playing things like Maokai or the kind of reworked Galio, there's been a couple tweaks to his abilities. If you build Spirit Visage and Adaptive Helm, you're going to be so tanky that these upfront burst mages will not be able to deal with you. So keep an eye out on the next couple of patches, and especially in pro play, for the rise of tanks. Our first pick of the week this week is coming from me, and it's Jax, who was directly nerfed on this patch, so at first glance you might be like, why on earth would he be your pick of the week? However, despite his direct nerf, the Death Stance buff/change is massive for Jax. If you didn't see in the patch notes, now Death Stance healing works on all types of damage, not just physical, and that's huge for a champion like Jax, who does roughly 60% physical, roughly 20 to 30% magic, and then if you take Conqueror, which you should be, you do about 10% true damage. Definitely don't want to build this first. You need attack speed, you need your Trinity Force, probably still a Tiamat as well, but for those Jaxes going Essence Reaver and Ginsu's Rageblade, could look to swap out that Death Stance in there and be near unkillable. So for that reason alone, with the Death Stance buffs, he will be my pick of the week. Works both in theory in top lane and jungle. Another champion that was rising up a lot last patch was Teemo with Dark Harvest, because the rune was already OP, and with Teemo, because Dark Harvest doesn't have a range, that means that if they're below half HP and they run into a shroom across the map, that's free stacks for you without really having to do much. And then later on, once you have some stacks, you just flash Q on somebody below half health and kill them. Now the only problem is that Dark Harvest was repeatedly nerfed. It was hotfixed once and then nerfed on this patch. So this is something we will have to see. This is genuinely a change we'll have to see and look at. I still suspect that Teemo will be good, but the problem is that his main rune and what made him really A tier or creeping into S tier, especially for normal levels of play, was Dark Harvest. For high elo top lane, you do have a couple of champions as always shooting their way up. I think Lissandra and Rumble are much better in high levels of play than lower levels of play. Tryndamere could get a small buff from this Death Stance change. You could go for this, and because again you go Conqueror, I think that's the one thing to look at this big patch, is the Death Stance change makes that certain champions who do mixed damage but would want to build the item anyway. I've even heard something like Katarina Death Stance, because you have some AD scalings in your kit. A little bit weird, but we'll have to see how that works. Victor was directly nerfed as well. I think it was a sizable and reasonable nerf to top lane Victor, so he will drop down a bit as well. Onto the jungle position now, where this one I would say is mostly the same. You have a couple of movers here and there, and the Dark Harvest nerfs do impact the jungle a bit, but honestly some of these champions will just swap to Electrocute anyway, maybe even Phase Rush. Kayn could in theory go Conqueror or something like that. I think a lot of these champions are just fine without Dark Harvest, especially you have to remember that nerfing Dark Harvest in the jungle or making it worse overall also nerfs all the other champions taking the rune. So if you're able to swap to something else, I mean, as easily as Shaco can take Dark Harvest, he probably can take Electrocute and be just fine. That being said, how about we totally contradict that and talk about Elise really quick. Elise was rising up with Dark Harvest in the jungle, but it's also not just because of that rune. One big thing about Elise right now is that you can take 20 AP and armor in your runes, and then if you wanted to go the precision tree for Alacrity for that 3 to 18% attack speed, you can also do that. So Elise was coming back, and that's why you see her as A tier and doing well all across the board. With the direct nerfs to Dark Harvest, does that mean Elise falls back down the tier list? Maybe. Perhaps I could see that being the case, but if you're able to swap to Electrocute and be just fine, honestly, even in the jungle role disposition, with the rune changes, you could probably take Aftershock if you wanted as well, or even Predator, you could do something like that. Onto the high elo junglers. As always, our biggest movers are the assassin junglers. If you know anything about our tier list, consistently, time and time again, we can see that the position for the jungle has this massive discrepancy between assassin junglers in high elo and tank junglers in low elo. And maybe until the meta changes, that's always going to be the case. In low elo, if you're a jungler, play a tank. Play a Mumu, play Rammus, whatever. And then if you're high elo, go ahead and play Kha'Zix, learn Rengar, learn Shaco, stuff like that. As far as Camille in the jungle, she did receive a big base attack speed nerf, and that is huge. You can't look at that number and say that doesn't mean anything, it absolutely does. However, the best Camille players in the world and the best junglers will still make her work. This just weeds out the lesser Camille players who were just abusing her because she's OP, and now this is going to make it so the really good Camille players just have to work a bit harder. Alright, on to mid lane, where we have two pick of the weeks this time, with Wukong from Hewitt in S tier, and Adam having Cassiopeia in A tier, which we will get into. Let's just talk about the rest of the pool very quickly. Mid is arguably the most dominant role now, and that's because Dark Harvest is pretty good on some poke mages, and because it's the middle of the map, and because it allows you to roam, pressure, and do everything and move and be the second jungler. Right now, laning is so valuable and so important that people have to ban specific matchups to even play certain champions, because if you lose lane pressure, if you lose lane priority, that is enough by itself to lose you the game. Probably now more than ever in League of Legends, having a losing matchup is the worst thing that can happen to you, because certain champions just can never recover with a lack of pressure. This transitions perfectly into Adam's pick of the week as Cassiopeia, and the reason that this makes perfect sense is because it's evident based on a new Cassiopeia build that originally came from the Chinese server and is now surfacing why the meta is the way it is. Adam has chosen Cassiopeia in A tier even for low elo, and the reason being is because of a build adjustment. As always, Cassio was going tier, maybe Aroa being a late game scaling DPS champion. None of that exists anymore. Cassiopeias are now swapping their build and going hard in the early game. The build is something like Luden's Echo, Rylai's, Liandry's, or Morello, and the entire purpose of doing this is by going Comet, and what you basically want to do is say, no, I'm not waiting for a tier to stack up, I'm not waiting for late game, I am going to be as strong as I possibly can before one item, on one item, and on two items. As far as the meta around her, this makes perfect sense. How often are games, especially in the preseason, going to go to 35-40 minutes? Almost never. You just want to be as dominant as you can, and with this build, the idea is that you are pushing your advantage, you are being so dominant in lane and always having pressure, you can easily move over and win level 2 fights over scuttle crabs, over jungle camps, you can easily move down and take towers. Cassio is a do-it-all champion in the very, very early levels like 1 and 2, and then with this build, you're pretty strong at level 6. Hewitt's pick of the week is Wukong mid lane. Now this seems pretty weird, but keep in mind there's one big reason that this has become good again. Despite receiving some nerfs in previous patches, and Wukong mid and Wukong every role being good earlier on in Season 8, the reason Wukong is good again is for one simple fact, and that is the rune stats are amazing for him. Being able to take AD, and then armor for Wukong makes his laning phase much better than a lot of people expect. Wukong is also a champion that thrives in the preseason in solo queue chaos, and his amount of damage, how easy he is to play, and how tanky he gets through all these skirmishes and teamfights due to his passive means that Wukong is surprisingly good for climbing. As far as why Wukong is better mid than top lane, simple fact is you're gonna play against less tanks. While you do get outranged by mages, typically you can kill them around level 6 anyway, and if your jungler is there, simply just EQ onto them with an electrocute proc, and they're probably gonna die. For high elo mid lane, we can go over a couple of champions here. Probably the biggest surprise for me is just how good Zoe is. I guess Dark Harvest makes perfect sense, but even then Zoe has been rising up and up. I think Zoe is pretty darn good. Zillion, Vladimir, all pretty good. It's true that LeBlanc did receive some nerfs which drops her down probably from S into A tier. Maybe into B tier, we'll have to see about that one. I do think that Galio could be good, we'll have to see how the patch plays out. Maybe in high elo, Galio with his insane wave clear and his new Q mana cost might be a bit better. Obviously things like Karthus are OP. On to the bottom lane where mages galore still will rise up. Couple of things that are still good. I think Shield Bash Mordekaiser is pretty darn good. You guys should definitely try that one out. I think he's really good in the bottom lane and that's why you see him in S tier. Let's talk about Heimer for a sec. Heimer is a champion in which, wow, this champion got some bug fixes but ended up being buffs as well. He was already very good and is still going to be good. Yeah, he was using Dark Harvest which get nerfed, but I still think Heimer is going to be way above S tier. I think your probably best overall bottom lane pick this patch is going to be Heimer, so just keep an eye on him. I also think that in general, not just for the bottom lane or ADC role, whatever you would want to call it, or support, I think in general Lux bot lane is pretty good right now. You can play her both in those positions, and I think you can actually take the Presence of Mind rune in the precision tree, because now you can do that and not suffer taking the attack speed. Lux could go something like either Dark Harvest or Comet, and then as a secondary take precision with Presence of Mind and Coup de Grace. For high elo bot lane, Draven did drop down a bit in the normal list, but is still great in the high elo and the top elo, and that's because the best Draven players and guys that have tons and tons of experience playing Draven will be able to dodge more skill shots and actually lane versus mages, but the lower tier Draven players probably were struggling a lot versus the mages and the random things in bot lane. As far as the rest of the stuff, Twitch is still a good ADC. Lucian, Draven, and Yasuo are like your AD champions, and the rest of them are going to be mages or AP champions. I think a couple things in B tier are good. Grasp of the Undying Caitlyn is pretty good in B tier as well. Last but not least for supports, a couple of enchanters are good, but pretty much AP supports are going to be gods still. Honestly, I think one of the frustrations for the players right now is that they were expecting a lot more out of the preseason, other than mages getting better, which were already pretty good, especially in the bottom lane. I think that the preseason hasn't mixed up the meta at all. I'm kind of waiting for the actual Season 9 because this stuff is mostly going to be the same. I think your couple big risers are things like Xerath support. I do think Maokai support is pretty good. I do think Leona support is good. I do think Fiddlestick support is good, but we have to see a couple of other things. For now, I mean, your Zyra is good, your Brand is good, your Sona is good. For high elo, not much changes other than Bard and Thresh shooting way back up and some of the mage supports going down. This is to be expected because good Bard and Thresh players will be able to use their CC, and if you know anything about Thresh, he can absolutely deal with mages in the bottom lane if you're good, position well, and hit the hooks. Simply just hitting a hook and being able to catch them, squishing mages off guard will be your best bet. Other than that, I do think Soraka is going up and up. I think Janna's on the up and up. I think Zillion is still really good. When everybody's playing assassins, especially in high elo, pick Zillion. Just lock in Zillion. Your ultimate will be OP. Anyway, that is going to do it for the Mobalytics patch 8.24 tier list video. Make sure you leave a comment down below and use the new product. Use new Mobalytics 2.0 using the link in the description down below. Check it out, and we will see you guys next time.